Two black twin sisters, underestimated and targeted by racially biased police officers, seem like easy prey. But what the officers don't know is that these sisters are battle-hardened Marines, each bearing the weight of countless medals and heroic feats. When the challenge escalates, the twins' elite training and unbreakable bond unleash a storm the officers never saw coming. The fight for justice turns into a lesson in resilience and power, leaving no room for ignorance. Don't miss this gripping story. Subscribe and like our YouTube channel for more. The narrative begins with an unnerving quiet tension. The twins, Lena and Maya, stood in their modest apartment, their disciplined composure betraying the adrenaline coursing through them. They were reviewing their next steps, methodical and precise, as the sound of distant sirens grew louder. These weren't ordinary women, they were former Marine operatives, trained to anticipate and neutralize threats. The unease in the air was palpable as they prepared for an inevitable confrontation. A call earlier that evening had set things in motion. Lena had received a cryptic warning from a mutual friend in the community, hinting at an impending raid. Maya, sharpening her blade with deliberate movements, remarked on how predictable their pursuers were. The sisters knew this wasn't a routine operation, it was personal. The police unit targeting them had a reputation for profiling and harassing minorities under the guise of enforcing the law. Tonight, they'd made the mistake of underestimating their targets. The narrative shifts to the officers. Led by Sergeant Reynolds, the team was briefed in their tactical van. Reynolds, with a thin veneer of professionalism, instructed his team to contain the situation but made no effort to mask his prejudices. Officer Jansen, younger and slightly uneasy, questioned the urgency of the raid but was silenced with a sharp glare. The squad moved out, their equipment clinking softly as they exited the vehicle. They believed they were in control, unaware of the storm awaiting them. Back with the twins, Lena's sharp eyes caught movement outside their window. She gestured silently to Maya, who immediately took position. Their training dictated that every second counted. They assessed the officers' approach, noting their sloppy formation and lack of stealth. Maya smirked, whispering that their opponents were amateurs compared to the enemies they'd faced in war zones. The first officer attempted to breach the door, but the reinforced lock held firm. The twins' trap had been set. As the battering ram struck the door, a timed diversion in the alleyway triggered a loud explosion, drawing some officers away. Reynolds cursed, splitting his team to investigate. Lena and Maya used the chaos to move silently through the apartment, positioning themselves strategically. The narrative follows Jansen as he hesitates near a side entrance. His instincts told him something was wrong, but he lacked the experience to articulate it. Suddenly, a swift movement caught his eye. Before he could react, Maya disarmed him with fluid precision, pinning him to the ground. She leaned close, her voice cold but calm, and warned him to stay down if he valued his life. Jansen's radio crackled with frantic voices as he lay immobilized, realizing he was outmatched. Reynolds, now furious, barked orders into his radio. He demanded updates, but his team's fragmented responses revealed their disarray. Lena struck next, intercepting a pair of officers attempting to flank the building. She moved like a shadow, neutralizing them with calculated efficiency. The officers were stunned, not just by her strength but by the precision of her attacks. These were no ordinary civilians. The scene escalates as Reynolds himself enters the building, his confidence shaken but his determination unyielding. He's met with a chilling silence. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to mock his bravado. Suddenly, Lena appeared, blocking his path. She didn't speak, letting her presence and unwavering gaze convey her dominance. Reynolds reached for his weapon, but Lena disarmed him with a move so fast he barely registered it. She pinned him against the wall, her voice low and controlled as she demanded to know why they were targeted. Meanwhile, Maya secured the remaining officers outside. She used their own tactics against them, creating diversions and exploiting their lack of cohesion. By the time she returned to the apartment, she found Lena standing over a subdued Reynolds, his earlier arrogance replaced with palpable fear. The twins exchanged a glance, unspoken communication passing between them. The narrative concludes with the arrival of reinforcements. Police sirens blared as backup units approached. Lena and Maya knew they couldn't hold their position much longer. With a calculated retreat plan, they vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene of humiliation for the officers. The final image is of Reynolds, sitting amidst the wreckage, his pride shattered and his team's incompetence exposed. The stage is set for the next chapter, where the twins take the fight to those who dared to target them, exposing corruption and reclaiming their power. The night settled over the city as Danielle and Denise drove through the dimly lit streets. Their faces were calm, but their minds were racing, replaying the earlier confrontation with the police officers. Both knew this wasn't over. The sisters had experienced discrimination before, but this time, it felt targeted, calculated. Denise tightened her grip on the steering wheel as Danielle scanned their surroundings, her instincts heightened from years of military training. At the same time, Sergeant Tucker sat in his squad car parked a few blocks away, his jaw clenched with frustration. The failed encounter earlier in the day lingered in his mind. He felt his authority challenged, his reputation at stake. He'd been in the force long enough to recognize when someone was hiding something, and those two women had a presence that unnerved him. It wasn't just their confidence, it was the way they moved, the way they observed. He picked up his radio and called in Officer Grant, his loyal but overly ambitious partner. They had unfinished business. Across town, Danielle and Denise arrived at their small apartment. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Danielle laid out a map of the city on the kitchen table, while Denise retrieved a laptop. Their movements were precise and synchronized, a testament to years of working together under pressure. They didn't need words to communicate. Their bond was unspoken but unbreakable. Danielle pointed to a spot on the map where the earlier confrontation had occurred, and Denise nodded, pulling up surveillance footage from nearby cameras. The footage revealed what they had suspected: the officers hadn't left the area after the encounter. Instead, they lingered, observing, and eventually regrouped a short distance away. Danielle's eyes narrowed as she spotted Sergeant Tucker speaking into his radio, gesturing angrily. Denise's fingers danced across the keyboard, capturing the footage and noting the license plates of the unmarked cars parked nearby. "They're not just watching," Danielle murmured. "They're planning." Meanwhile, Tucker and Grant met at a diner on the outskirts of town. Tucker laid out his frustrations while Grant listened intently, his eagerness to prove himself evident. Tucker outlined a plan to bring those women in under the pretense of an ongoing investigation. It was flimsy at best, but he knew that sometimes all it took was intimidation to force compliance. Grant suggested involving a few more officers, but Tucker shook his head. Too many people meant too many questions. This needed to stay under the radar. Back at the apartment, Denise tapped into their military contacts, encrypting her messages carefully. She sent a brief but urgent request to an old ally for background checks on the officers involved. Danielle, meanwhile, prepared a discreet bag with essentials, just in case they needed to move quickly. They'd faced worse situations in combat zones, but this was different. This was home, and the enemy wore a badge. The following day, the sisters decided to confront the situation head-on. They visited a local community center, a hub for advocacy and support, where they met with an attorney specializing in civil rights. The attorney listened attentively as they recounted the events, offering guidance and reassurance. He emphasized the importance of documentation and suggested filing a formal complaint. Danielle and Denise knew this was the right move, but it felt inadequate against the shadow of systemic injustice they were now up against. As they left the community center, they noticed an unmarked car idling nearby. Danielle's sharp eyes recognized the driver, Officer Grant. He was pretending to read a newspaper, but his occasional glances in their direction gave him away. Denise discreetly snapped a photo of the car and its license plate before they walked to their vehicle. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. Later that evening, Tucker and Grant gathered in a secluded parking lot with two additional officers they trusted. Tucker outlined his plan: a routine traffic stop to detain the women and search their vehicle. The other officers exchanged uneasy glances, but ultimately agreed, their loyalty to Tucker overriding their reservations. Grant, eager to prove his worth, volunteered to lead the stop. Unaware of the exact details but anticipating an escalation, Danielle and Denise prepared. They installed dash cameras in their car and ensured their phones were fully charged. They also reviewed the footage they had captured, noting the officers' patterns and routines. Their training taught them to anticipate the enemy's moves, and they weren't about to be caught off guard. That night, as the sisters drove through a quiet stretch of road, flashing blue and red lights appeared in their rearview mirror. Denise slowed the car and pulled over, her face calm but her muscles tense. Danielle subtly activated the dash camera and placed her phone in her lap, ready to record. Two patrol cars boxed them in, and 4 officers approached, their flashlights illuminating the interior of the sisters' vehicle. Grant took the lead, his demeanor cocky and aggressive. He demanded identification and began questioning them about their destination. Danielle complied, her tone measured but firm. Denise remained silent, her eyes scanning the scene, noting the positions of the officers and the tension in their postures. Grant's questions became increasingly invasive, his frustration growing as the sisters maintained their composure. Tucker stood back, observing. He could feel the situation slipping out of control but didn't intervene. Grant, emboldened by the perceived authority of the badge, ordered Danielle to step out of the vehicle. She hesitated for a moment, then complied, stepping out with the grace and precision of a soldier. Grant's bravado faltered slightly as he noticed her confident stance, but he pressed on, accusing her of obstructing justice when she questioned the legality of the stop. Denise, still in the car, subtly activated an emergency signal on her phone, alerting their attorney and a trusted contact. She kept her movements minimal, her face betraying no emotion. Outside, Danielle's calm demeanor only seemed to infuriate Grant further. He moved closer, invading her personal space, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze with a steady intensity that unnerved him. One of the other officers stepped forward, attempting to de-escalate the situation, but Tucker barked at him to stand down. The tension reached a breaking point when Grant grabbed Danielle's arm, attempting to handcuff her. In one fluid motion, she twisted free and stepped back, her movements precise and controlled. Denise exited the vehicle, her presence equally commanding, and stood beside her sister. For a moment, everything was still. The officers hesitated, sensing they were outmatched despite their numbers. Tucker's frustration boiled over, and he ordered them to finish it. Before they could act, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The sisters had anticipated this and timed their emergency signal perfectly. A marked patrol car and an unmarked vehicle arrived, their occupants stepping out with authoritative strides. The new arrivals included a senior officer and the sisters' attorney, who had brought along a journalist friend. The officers who had initiated the stop were caught off guard, their confidence evaporating. Tucker tried to explain the situation, but his words faltered under the weight of scrutiny. The attorney demanded accountability, and the journalist began recording the scene, asking pointed questions that Tucker and his team struggled to answer. Danielle and Denise remained composed, their silence speaking volumes as the situation unfolded. They knew this wasn't the end, but it was a step toward exposing the abuse of power they had faced. As the senior officer ordered an internal review and the journalist continued documenting, the sisters exchanged a glance. Their unspoken resolve was clear: they wouldn't stop until justice was served. The tension between Danielle and Denise continued to mount as they realized the scope of the operation against them. While the evidence they had collected pointed to the officers' unlawful actions, it was clear this was not just a rogue element but part of something more systemic. The realization deepened their resolve as they prepared to confront this threat head-on. The day began with Denise checking their equipment. Years of training had left them with an instinctual need to be prepared for any situation. As she double-checked their comms and covert tracking devices, Danielle pieced together a broader picture from the fragments of intelligence they had gathered. Her focus was razor-sharp as she reviewed timestamps, security footage, and intercepted communications from the officers' network. A knock at the door signaled their contact. A local journalist, skeptical yet intrigued by their story, had agreed to meet. The journalist's presence added another layer to their plan, offering a way to bring public attention to what was unfolding. They shared their findings, careful not to overwhelm him with details, but providing enough context to ensure he understood the gravity of the situation. The journalist left with a promise to write an exposé, adding urgency to their timeline. Meanwhile, the officer's perspective revealed growing paranoia. Their internal communications buzzed with conflicting narratives. Some were hesitant, worried that their actions were drawing too much attention. Others, led by the more aggressive members of the group, doubled down on their tactics, insisting that their authority should not be questioned. Back at their safe house, Danielle and Denise worked to anticipate the next moves of the officers. The twins had been taught to see patterns, and it became clear that the group was planning an escalation. The officers had miscalculated by underestimating their opponents, seeing them as merely civilians. This arrogance would be their downfall. By mid-afternoon, the twins tracked the officers to an abandoned warehouse. The location served as a base for their illicit operations and a hub for planning further actions. Using drones equipped with cameras, Danielle and Denise surveyed the building. The footage revealed key entry points and the number of personnel inside. They planned their approach meticulously, knowing they had only one chance to catch the officers red-handed. As dusk settled, the twins moved into position. Their approach was calculated and stealthy. Using their training, they disabled surveillance cameras and silently took out guards posted outside. Inside the warehouse, the officers were gathered, reviewing their next steps. Danielle and Denise listened in, recording everything. The conversation made it clear that these officers were involved in a much larger operation, one that targeted not just them but other marginalized groups. When the time came to act, the twins executed their plan flawlessly. Using smoke grenades and diversionary tactics, they sowed confusion among the officers. As the chaos unfolded, Danielle accessed a laptop containing incriminating evidence, while Denise secured the scene. The officers, unprepared for such a coordinated attack, found themselves cornered. The narrative shifted to the lead officer, whose confidence began to unravel. He realized too late that his underestimation of the twins had cost him. As he attempted to escape, Danielle intercepted him, her movements precise and calculated. Denise, meanwhile, confronted another officer, ensuring no one slipped through their grasp. The operation concluded with law enforcement arriving, alerted by the evidence the twins had preemptively shared with trusted officials. The compromised officers were detained, their involvement in the operation exposed. The journalists' presence ensured that the story would reach the public, amplifying the impact of their actions. As the night ended, Danielle and Denise reflected on their journey. The events had tested their limits, but also reaffirmed their purpose. They had not only defended themselves but exposed a corrupt system, proving that resilience and unity could overcome even the most insidious threats. They knew the fight wasn't over, but for now, they had won a significant battle. The air was tense, the atmosphere charged with an undeniable sense of unease as the twins prepared for what lay ahead. They had gathered as much intelligence as possible, but the deeper they delved, the more intricate the conspiracy became. Multiple factions were involved, each with their motives, and the twins knew they were walking into a trap. But they also understood that hesitation was not an option. The scene shifted to a covert meeting room where a group of officers sat around a table. Leading them was Captain Myers, the architect of the twisted operation. His voice carried an edge of authority as he laid out the next steps. His frustration was evident as he barked orders, demanding results from his subordinates. Every word revealed his desperation to regain control, which was slipping away with each move the twins made. The room was a cauldron of tension, with the officers exchanging uneasy glances, their loyalty wavering under the weight of the situation. Meanwhile, the twins executed their plan with precision. Alex took point, her movements calculated and purposeful, while Lisa provided cover. They infiltrated the designated area, a supposedly abandoned warehouse now serving as the corrupt officers' operations hub. Every corner they turned unveiled another layer of deceit, stacks of falsified evidence, cash bribes, and confidential files detailing the network's reach. The sight of these documents only fueled their determination. The twins split up briefly to cover more ground, maintaining constant communication through their earpieces. Alex navigated the main floor, her eyes scanning for any hidden threats, while Lisa moved towards the upper level, drawn by the faint hum of electronics. Lisa's instincts proved accurate as she stumbled upon a secured room filled with surveillance equipment. Screens displayed real-time feeds from various locations, including private residences and public spaces. It was evident that these officers had crossed every line. The narrative shifted to one of the officers on patrol outside the warehouse. Officer Daniels was conflicted. He had joined Myers' operation out of fear rather than allegiance, and the twins' interference had planted seeds of doubt. As he patrolled, Daniels overheard a conversation on his radio. The exchange revealed Myers' plans to silence anyone who jeopardized their operation, including Daniels himself. The realization hit hard, and for the first time, he contemplated switching sides. Back inside, Alex encountered her first obstacle, a guard patrolling the main floor. Using her training, she subdued him swiftly and silently, ensuring no alarms were raised. She signaled Lisa, who acknowledged the update. Lisa, meanwhile, worked to extract data from the surveillance system, copying files onto a secure drive. Each passing second heightened the risk of detection, but she remained focused. The perspective shifted again, this time to Captain Myers, who was alerted to an anomaly in their system. A technician reported a breach, and Myers immediately suspected the twins. His anger flared as he barked orders to his men, mobilizing a response team to secure the warehouse. Unbeknownst to him, his movements were being monitored by a third party and external force with its interests in the operation's success. This group had been financing Myers and had no tolerance for failure. As the response team closed in, Lisa completed the data extraction and regrouped with Alex. The twins strategized quickly, deciding to set traps to delay their pursuers. Using improvised explosives, they rigged key entry points. The first blast echoed through the building, creating chaos among the response team. The twins used the distraction to make their way towards an alternate exit. The narrative introduced a new character, Agent Carter, a federal investigator who had been tracking the corrupt officers from a distance. Carter received intel about the twins' presence at the warehouse and decided to intervene. Carter's arrival added a new layer of complexity, as she was unsure whether the twins were allies or additional threats. Her team moved in cautiously, their weapons drawn. Back at the warehouse, the twins found themselves cornered. The response team had recovered from the initial shock and regrouped. A firefight ensued, showcasing the twins' combat prowess as they expertly navigated the situation. Despite being outnumbered, their synchronization and training gave them the upper hand. Each move was deliberate, every shot calculated. Outside, Daniels made a pivotal decision. He abandoned his post and approached Agent Carter, revealing everything he knew about Myers' operation. Carter, initially skeptical, recognized the sincerity in Daniels' words and decided to use his insider knowledge to her advantage. Together, they coordinated an assault on the warehouse. The twins, still engaged in combat, noticed the sudden shift in dynamics as Carter's team breached the building. Recognizing an opportunity, Alex signaled Lisa to stand down momentarily, assessing whether this new force was friend or foe. Carter, spotting the twins, ordered her team to hold fire. A tense standoff followed, with both sides wary of making the first move. Carter broke the silence, asserting her authority and demanding an explanation from the twins. Alex and Lisa, understanding the importance of an alliance, revealed their identities and motives. Carter, impressed by their candor and skill, proposed a temporary partnership to take down Myers and his network. The final segment of the scene depicted the combined efforts of the twins and Carter's team. Using Daniels' intel, they pinpointed Myers' location and launched a coordinated strike. The operation was a masterclass in strategy and execution, with each participant playing a crucial role. Myers, realizing the inevitability of his downfall, attempted to flee but was intercepted by Alex. Their confrontation was intense, with Alex leveraging her training to subdue Myers without lethal force. The scene concluded with Myers' arrest and the recovery of critical evidence. The twins and Carter stood amidst the aftermath, their alliance forged in the crucible of combat. While the battle was won, they knew the war against corruption was far from over. Their resolve was unshaken, their next steps clear. The fifth scene opens with the twins, Amara and Lena, back in their temporary safe house, recalibrating their strategies. Their movements are synchronized, reflecting their years of elite marine training. While Amara meticulously examines a map, Lena disassembles and cleans a weapon, her hands moving instinctively as her mind analyzes their next steps. The tension between them is palpable. Both know the stakes have risen exponentially. Every action is calculated, there is no room for error. As they solidify their plans, the scene shifts to the perspective of the antagonists. Detective Jacobs, one of the officers leading the racially charged vendetta, sits in a dimly lit office. His frustration is mounting. Reports of the twins' movements are sporadic, their ability to evade detection frustrating his every effort. Jacobs slams a file on his desk, his anger barely contained. He's joined by Officer Barnes, his accomplice, who shares his contempt. Their conversation hints at a darker plot, suggesting that the twins are not merely targets of bias but scapegoats in a larger, more sinister conspiracy. Their aim: to exploit the twins as pawns to distract from internal corruption within the department. Back at the safe house, Amara receives an encrypted message from an old contact within the military, a former comrade who's now deep undercover in law enforcement. The message confirms their suspicions. The corrupt officers are part of a shadow operation, targeting minorities under the guise of maintaining order. This revelation ignites the twins' resolve. They're no longer just fighting for survival, they're exposing systemic injustice. The narrative cuts to a high-stakes operation in progress. Jacobs and Barnes, unaware that the twins are onto them, have set up a trap in an abandoned warehouse. Believing they have outmaneuvered the twins, they station snipers on the rooftops and plainclothes officers scattered throughout the vicinity. The warehouse itself is rigged with surveillance equipment and traps designed to corner their targets. The twins approach the location with precision, having anticipated the setup. Amara navigates through the shadows, her every movement silent and deliberate. Lena scales a nearby building to disable the snipers. As the first sniper readies his weapon, Lena strikes with swift efficiency, neutralizing him without a sound. She communicates the all-clear to Amara, who advances toward the warehouse. Inside, Jacobs watches the surveillance feeds with a smirk. He's confident they've finally cornered the twins. But his confidence begins to waver as the feeds start cutting out one by one. Amara's skill with electronics is unmatched, and she systematically disables their surveillance system, leaving them blind. Panic sets in among the officers as their communication lines are jammed. Barnes, visibly unnerved, suggests retreating, but Jacobs' pride refuses to allow it. Amara breaches the warehouse's entrance, her movements a blur of calculated efficiency. She engages in hand-to-hand combat with the first officer who confronts her, disarming and incapacitating him within seconds. Meanwhile, Lena provides cover from her elevated position, using suppressed fire to take out key threats. Their coordination is flawless, a testament to their bond and training. The narrative shifts again to Jacobs, now desperate. He's forced to confront the reality that his operation is crumbling. In a final desperate move, he decides to confront the twins directly. Armed and with Barnes at his side, he storms into the fray. The ensuing confrontation is intense. Jacobs' arrogance is no match for the twins' discipline. Lena disarms Barnes with a calculated strike, while Amara faces Jacobs. Their fight is brutal, each move a test of skill and willpower. As Jacobs falters, the sound of approaching sirens fills the air. The twins' military contact had tipped off an internal affairs unit, which arrives just in time to witness the aftermath. Jacobs and Barnes are apprehended, their corruption laid bare. The twins, though battered, stand tall, their mission accomplished. The scene closes with a moment of quiet reflection. Amara and Lena watch from a distance as justice begins to take its course. Their expressions are a mix of relief and determination. They know this victory is just one battle in a much larger war. Their journey is far from over, but they're ready for whatever comes next. The tension escalated as the twin sisters, Naomi and Natalie, infiltrated the makeshift police command post in pursuit of evidence that would expose the corruption targeting them. The air was charged with urgency as they moved in sync, communicating through subtle gestures honed during years of military service. Their faces, stern and unreadable, masked the storm brewing within. This was no longer about survival, it was about justice. Inside the command post, Officer Mitchell hovered over a table scattered with documents. His demeanor was confident, bordering on smug, as he reviewed plans laid out by Captain Harris. Harris, the ringleader, exuded authority, his every movement calculated and deliberate. He gestured toward a whiteboard filled with diagrams and marked locations. His voice carried the weight of conviction as he outlined their next steps, oblivious to the predators stalking his den. Outside, the twins analyzed their options. Naomi motioned toward a side entrance where a lone guard stood, seemingly distracted by his phone. Natalie nodded, her eyes narrowing. They moved swiftly, eliminating the guard with precise, silent movements. Naomi caught the door before it could close, and the two slipped inside. As they moved through the corridors, the muffled voices of officers grew louder. The twins halted near a partially open door, peering inside. They saw Mitchell and Harris engrossed in conversation. The dialogue was chilling. Harris spoke of leveraging public fears, painting the twins as violent threats while framing their operations as necessary to maintain order. Natalie clenched her fists, the injustice fueling her resolve. Naomi placed a calming hand on her sister's shoulder. They couldn't afford a misstep. Not yet. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Officer Thompson reviewed security feeds. His unease grew as he noticed discrepancies, shadows moving where there shouldn't be. He radioed Harris, but the captain dismissed his concerns, attributing them to paranoia. Thompson's doubts lingered as he scrutinized the monitors. The twins advanced to an adjacent room where a laptop hummed faintly on a desk. Naomi connected a USB device, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she bypassed firewalls and extracted files. Natalie kept watch, her sharp gaze darting to every corner. Naomi's whispered confirmation, "Got it," was a beacon of hope. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. The sisters froze, their military instincts taking over. Natalie extinguished the room's light while Naomi concealed the laptop. The door creaked open, and Officer Daniel stepped in, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He lingered, suspicion etched across his face. The twins waited in silence, muscles coiled like springs. Daniels turned to leave, and in a flash, Naomi struck. She disarmed and subdued him with surgical precision, leaving him unconscious but unharmed. The encounter cost them time. Security alerts flared across the building, triggered by Daniels' failure to report. Officers mobilized, their radios crackling with coordinated directives. Harris barked orders, his confidence now laced with irritation. "Find them," he commanded, his tone brooking no argument. The twins navigated the labyrinthine corridors, their pace relentless. Harris's voice echoed through the hallways, urging his team to close in. Naomi and Natalie's synchronized movements mirrored their unshakable bond, their unspoken communication a testament to years of shared battles. Back in the command center, Thompson's frustration mounted as he noticed the compromised files. He called for a lockdown, triggering metal shutters to descend over exits. The twins were trapped. "They think they've cornered us," Natalie muttered, her lips curving into a defiant smirk. Naomi's response was a determined nod. "Let's show them what that means." The twins initiated a diversion, setting off a smoke grenade in a storage room. Alarms blared as officers scrambled to investigate. Using the chaos to their advantage, Naomi and Natalie moved toward a utility shaft they'd identified on the blueprints earlier. Meanwhile, Harris and Mitchell regrouped, their frustration evident. Thompson confronted Harris, voicing his suspicions about the operation's ethics. The captain dismissed him, accusing Thompson of insubordination. The tension between them simmered, threatening to boil over. The twins reached the utility shaft, their escape plan hindered by an unexpected barrier. Natalie examined the obstruction, her mind racing. Naomi kept watch, her pulse steady despite the circumstances. Natalie's determination paid off as she found a workaround, and the sisters climbed into the shaft, leaving no trace behind. Harris's frustration reached its zenith as he received reports of the twins' continued evasion. He ordered a full sweep of the building, his tone sharp and unforgiving. Officers moved with renewed urgency, their boots pounding the floors. Inside the shaft, the twins overheard snippets of radio chatter. Their enemies were closing in, but the sisters remained undeterred. Naomi whispered their next move, and Natalie nodded, her resolve unwavering. The shaft led them to a maintenance area with access to the building's power controls. Naomi devised a plan to disable the lights, plunging the facility into darkness. Natalie executed the maneuver, her actions swift and deliberate. The building shuddered as circuits tripped, and the lights flickered out. In the command center, chaos erupted. Officers stumbled in the dark, their radios crackling with confusion. Harris cursed, his authority momentarily undermined. Thompson took advantage of the disorder, covertly accessing Harris's files. What he found confirmed his worst fears, evidence of systemic corruption and targeted persecution. The twins capitalized on the blackout, navigating toward an exit they'd identified earlier. Their path was fraught with near misses as officers patrolled the hallways. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. The twins' training was evident as they adapted to the fluid circumstances. As they neared the exit, a group of officers cornered them. Harris appeared, his demeanor cold and triumphant. He demanded their surrender, his words laced with derision. The twins exchanged a glance, their silent communication conveying a shared decision. They wouldn't go down without a fight. The confrontation was explosive. The twins' combat prowess overwhelmed the officers, their movements a blur of calculated strikes and counters. Harris's confidence faltered as he witnessed his team's defeat. The twins advanced toward him, their eyes fierce with determination. Harris reached for his weapon, but Natalie disarmed him with a swift kick. Naomi restrained him, her grip unyielding. The captain's bravado crumbled as he faced the reality of his defeat. Meanwhile, Thompson transmitted the incriminating evidence to an external source, ensuring its dissemination. His conscience outweighed his loyalty to Harris, and he resolved to expose the truth. The twins secured their escape, leaving Harris and his team incapacitated. Outside, they vanished into the night, their mission far from over. They knew the fight for justice had only begun, But for now, they'd struck a decisive blow against their adversaries. The final confrontation began with an air of anticipation. Nyla and Zuri, poised and prepared, knew that the evidence they had gathered was their strongest weapon. Their goal was clear: expose the corruption within the police force and dismantle the network of power that enabled systemic discrimination. The two sisters entered the courthouse under the guise of ordinary citizens. They carried the data drives and recordings obtained from their earlier infiltration into the secret meeting. The courthouse was bustling, but their presence remained unnoticed, as their years of military training had honed their ability to blend in. Simultaneously, the corrupt police captain, aware that his operation was unraveling, had begun his own countermeasures. He deployed loyal officers to monitor potential leaks and eliminate threats. Among his subordinates, tensions were high. Whispers of doubt and fear circulated as rumors of Nyla and Zuri's capabilities spread. Nyla and Zuri met their inside contact, the whistleblower officer, in a secluded room. The officer handed them the final piece of the puzzle, a signed agreement between the police captain and local political figures. This document proved beyond a doubt that the discrimination and harassment were systematically planned. The sisters confirmed the authenticity of the document and finalized their strategy. They would present the evidence to the district attorney during the afternoon's public hearing. Unbeknownst to them, the captain had set a trap. As Nyla and Zuri moved through the courthouse corridors, plainclothes officers shadowed their every step. The sisters exchanged subtle signals, aware of the surveillance but maintaining their composure. They reached the designated courtroom moments before the hearing began. Inside, the atmosphere was charged. The district attorney presided over the hearing, flanked by city officials and senior police representatives. The audience comprised journalists, activists, and community leaders, all eager for accountability. Nyla and Zuri sat strategically, keeping their focus on the proceedings while staying alert to potential threats. The hearing began with testimonies from community members detailing incidents of harassment and abuse by the police. Each testimony painted a grim picture of systemic injustice. The captain's defense team attempted to discredit the witnesses, but their efforts were met with resistance from the audience, whose murmurs of support grew louder with each testimony. At the height of the hearing, Nyla and Zuri rose. They presented themselves as former Marines and introduced the evidence they had gathered. Their words were precise and unyielding as they described the corruption they had uncovered. The room fell silent as they played the recordings, each revelation landing like a thunderclap. The signed agreement was displayed on the courtroom screen, eliciting gasps of shock. The captain, seated among his peers, shifted uncomfortably. His confident facade crumbled as the evidence mounted against him. He exchanged tense glances with his legal counsel, realizing the gravity of his predicament. The district attorney, visibly alarmed, called for a recess to review the evidence. During the recess, chaos erupted in the courthouse. The captain's loyalists moved to intercept Nyla and Zuri, aiming to confiscate the remaining evidence. The sisters anticipated the maneuver. They split up, forcing their pursuers to divide their forces. Zuri navigated the crowded hallways with agility, drawing the attention of several officers while Nyla secured the data drives. In the stairwell, Zuri faced a physical confrontation with two officers. Her movements were swift and calculated as she neutralized their advances, her marine training evident in every strike and counter. She subdued her attackers, leaving them incapacitated but unharmed. Meanwhile, Nyla evaded her pursuers by accessing a restricted corridor, using her strategic mindset to stay ahead. The captain, desperate to regain control, issued orders to escalate. He deployed additional officers to contain the situation, but his actions only drew more attention. Journalists began capturing the commotion on their devices, broadcasting the unfolding drama live. The public's reaction was swift and outraged, amplifying calls for transparency and justice. Nyla and Zuri regrouped in the main lobby. Their determination remained unwavering as they confronted the captain directly. The confrontation was tense, with the captain attempting to rationalize his actions. Nyla's voice cut through his justifications, calling out the harm he had caused and the communities he had targeted. Zuri's presence underscored their united front, her gaze steady and unyielding. As the district attorney returned, flanked by security personnel, the captain's fate was sealed. The evidence was irrefutable, and the public demand for accountability was undeniable. The district attorney announced that an independent investigation would commence immediately, and the captain was placed under arrest. The room erupted in a mixture of applause and relief as the corrupt system began to crumble. In the aftermath, Nyla and Zuri stood together outside the courthouse. Reporters surrounded them, seeking statements and insights. The sisters spoke with clarity and conviction, emphasizing the need for systemic reform and the power of unity in the face of injustice. Their bravery inspired a wave of activism, galvanizing the community to demand change. As the sun set, Nyla and Zuri reflected on their journey. They had faced formidable adversaries and endured countless challenges, but their resilience and determination had prevailed. The fight for justice was far from over, but they knew they had taken a pivotal step toward a better future. Together they walked away, ready to face whatever lay ahead with unwavering resolve.